Everyone, it's the Miserable Movie Man back once again with another video. Now I know on my channel I've done a lot of Star Trek content, and of course, yes, I am a big Star Trek fan, but I'm also a huge Star Wars fan, and I wanted to start adding more Star Wars content to the channel. So this is the first video, even though I did reviews of The Acolyte, that will be talking a bit more about Star Wars. And instead of focusing specifically on the Star Wars content, I wanted to talk a bit in this video about George Lucas. I think George Lucas is the last great visionary director that we had who really changed the game in Hollywood. And of course you can watch ILM on Disney Plus, Light and Magic. It's such a brilliant background insight into how Lucas has influenced cinema in so many ways to this day. I think we have some great directors today. I love things like Villeneuve does and others. And probably for me the last sort of folks to challenge the game or change the visual style was maybe Tim Burton with his aesthetic that he did in films like Edward Scissorhands, or the Wachowskis. They were brothers before, but Lily and Lana Wachowski, when they did The Matrix, really showed us something we've never seen before. And yes, I know you can say things like The Mandalorian uses the volume, which really gives such an immersive experience that it just blows you away. But I think to me that really was an extension of the green screen and blue screen technology that people have been using for a while, and I guess back in the day were pretty innovative techniques, but now are fairly standard. But what I really think I want to say with Lucas is really just my thoughts on why he is so legendary, for me at least. I mean, this is a man that challenged the entire cinema and movie making structure. He challenged every single way things were done. He challenged all of the current sort of oversight bodies and the folks sort of running the industry as well. He challenged the whole Hollywood studio dynamic. And really, even though he's a billionaire, he's really an independent filmmaker. Now, some will say George Lucas is a genius, and I think he has elements of genius to him. I wouldn't call him like an overall genius. His films are good. His imagination is strong. I think sometimes he lacks in the execution, especially when he's given a bit too much free rein. But one thing he always does, always tries to do, he hasn't done it in a while, is push the envelope. He pushed the envelope for every film he made. He pushed the envelope for all the original Star Wars films. He pushed the envelope for the prequels. He pushed the envelope for the Clone Wars. He's constantly trying to see how we can do things better, faster, more efficiently, and different. And this is what I think is lacking today in Hollywood. He really tries to fight against the norm, fight against the status quo. I mean, when he was making the original Star Wars trilogy, he had to use a lot of model effects shots, but he knew that computers were the way forwards, not just in the way that films were shot in terms of special effects, but just in the way that he used computers and computer technology to improve editing and sound and camera work and tracking. And the reason they could do the flyby shots in Star Wars is they invented sort of a computer motion capture system that allowed them to make the same passes with the camera motions every time using computer calculations. That allowed repetition on the camera motions. That enabled them to do different types of shots and different types of special effects added. Even in the way he looked at sound in terms of, working with Ben Burtt to get the sound catalog and making sure it was accessible at any time. He was the one that first came up with the digital editing system instead of having a lot of people manually cut the film and splice it together. So in many ways, Lucas being a visionary and a pioneer in these things is something we really have, I think, not given him enough credit for. We don't see it much today. People don't take as many chances, and his was one of necessity. I mean, he had a grand idea. He needed to get Star Wars done. He was limited by what he could do at the time, which is why he released the special editions, which definitely divide fans. I will say when they came out, I was a bit burned by them, but after age and maturity, I do think that, you know, Lucas tried to make those films as close to his original vision as possible, and as a director and an auteur, he is allowed that. That is his creation. So I get why he did it. But, you know, when he was making the films originally, he couldn't do many things he wanted to do, and he felt hamstrung and he was stressed, and you know, he really pushed hard to get everyone at the time to do as much as was physically achievable. But, you know, he knew where things were going. And George Lucas is not tech savvy. He said in so many interviews he's not a tech person, but he just knows inherently that something can be done easier and something can be done in a more efficient way. And so he tells people to go and do it. He says, hey, I'm not a computer guy, but you go figure out how I can put all of this film on a computer and then use some kind of, I don't even know if he knew the word GUI at the time, but use some kind of interface to allow me to pull things up at my will and splice things together as I want. And now everyone is a filmmaker. Everyone is capable of making a film on their phone and editing it using pretty simple software. The rise of YouTube alone has shown us that, while, you know, a little bit laborious, it's very achievable to you know, sort of be able to do very high class quality on a budget or on a home version of something. So Lucas gave us that. Lucas gave us that. Not only that, but every time he did a film, and this is another thing I think Lucas doesn't get enough credit for. Yeah, I think the stories can be classed as being a bit one-dimensional or straightforward, or maybe even a bit clunky at times, but every film he said, what can we do that we've never seen before? Where can we go where we've never been before? How can I make this film look unlike anything that has come before and blow people's minds when they see it in the cinema? I think Nolan tries to do part of that with his films, and he does a good blend of practical effects and SFX, and viewers of this channel will know that I don't give Nolan a huge amount of credit in terms of his execution of the final product. I think, you know, he has too much exposition and he relies on tricks that don't make sense, and his films are overly cerebral but fall down upon significant analysis. But one thing I will give Nolan a lot of credit for is he does also try to really blend those practical effects and those SFX together and come up with something very visual that will blow your minds. And both Nolan and Lucas were influenced by Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is a seminal work that pushed a lot of filmmakers like Spielberg into that genre. But again, going back to George Lucas, he took risks. He took so many risks in his career. He thought Star Wars was going to be a disaster. He didn't even like the final cut as much as he wanted to, because he couldn't finish a lot of things he wanted to, and he couldn't achieve a lot of things he wanted to. But, you know, what he managed to do just through that necessity, through that singularity of purpose, changed so much. And then on top of that, bucking the studio system, said to them, look, I'm going to finance the next film. I'm going to take the risk with my own money, and then I won't have to cut anything. I think he was, you know, very hurt by 5 minutes he had to cut from American Graffiti, and also the studio interference on the original Star Wars film. And yeah, he was lucky in that people took a chance on him. Certainly with American Graffiti, that was really a bet that he had with Francis Ford Coppola about trying to do something that, you know, was sort of fun and easy, like a romantic type of comedy type of film. And he went off and did it, and he made a film that delighted audiences, you know, did really well at the box office. Again, he took a risk by pushing the soundtrack he wanted for that film, and that cost a lot of money, but he knew what audiences wanted. He knew what he wanted to see on the screen, and he knew the effect it would have on people watching it. Similarly with Empire, he financed it himself, said to the studio, look, I'm going to do everything, so you can't challenge me. And he had good people around him. I mean, he had Irvin Kershner and Gary Kurtz and other people. So in one sense it was more collaborative perhaps than the prequels were. But even if you go to the prequels, I mean, look at what we got. At the time, people were upset with storyline, some of the acting. They're upset with Darth Vader being a little bit of an emo kid, but you look at what he gave us. Yeah, lightsaber fights were good for original trilogy. Look at what we're going to do for them in the prequels. Visual effects were good for the original trilogy. Look at what we're going to do for them in the prequels. Planets were good for the original trilogy. Look at what we're going to do for them in the prequels. You know, he gave us so much. Music was good in the original trilogy. Look what we're going to do for them in the prequels. In so many aspects, he pushed so many boundaries. Even when Clone Wars came out, this was an early era of using computer graphics on animation, and some people didn't think it would last. Some people were worried they're going to be out of a job. Watch the Pixar story as well. I think that's really interesting on Disney Plus. But again, he knew that he could use computers to make an animated series that gave him the visuals and the backgrounds and the planets that he wanted. I mean, Yoda was at such another level once Yoda was digitized. So it was incredible to see. These are the things that I think, again, people need to sort of, one, remember and give Lucas credit for, and two, need to be brought back to Hollywood today. We need more risks. We need more people with George Lucas's cojones to say, hey, I'm going to do things differently. I want to do things my way. And if I end up spectacularly failing, at least I would have tried to do what I envisioned. I think there's been so many, just talking about Star Wars content a little bit, and I can do a whole video on Kathleen Kennedy, but so many instances where good creative minds tried to pitch something a bit different or do something a bit different, and that was rejected. And that's why I think we have the Star Wars content we have today. That's why we have the sort of mainstream, run-of-the-mill, paint-by-numbers, incredibly woke stuff that's coming out that doesn't capture you anymore. Yeah, you have to have a good story and good characters, and Lucas was smart enough to study all of those archetypes. I mean, Campbell's Man with 1,000 Faces, he says he loves mythology and he loves stories. And George Lucas is an old school guy. He has old school morals and old school values, and that's why I think in a recent video explained why he wanted Greedo and Han to kind of shoot at the same time. You know, the fact of Han being a cold-blooded killer was not something that appealed to him. And while it did appeal to the fans, it gave Han Solo the edge, that's not something Lucas wanted to see in his character. And if you look at the original scripts of Star Wars, it went through so many rewrites, so many changes, so many versions of different characters in different parts. It was tough, and you know, the version that we ended up getting was this mishmash, hodgepodge, quilt work, jigsaw puzzle of what he'd originally intended. But you know, he made it stick. Let's put it that way. He made it stick. He wanted the battle on, perhaps, I don't know if it was called Endor, but the final battle in Jedi to be with the Wookiees. But he liked the Wookiee so much he put a Wookiee in Star Wars. So he's like, right, what can I do then? I need to figure out something else in terms of having a race of creatures that aren't Wookiees but can showcase something for me. So I came up with Ewoks, small furry creatures, to demonstrate the fact that you don't have to be the biggest, strongest person to make a difference. You know, in his films, he threw conventions on their heads. Damsel in distress? No way. I'm going to have Princess Leia, a very strong, competent individual who's going to make fun of the heroes. Same thing with Padme. She was a very strong, capable character. You know, are you going to have a great sage, great warrior-looking person to train Luke? No, I'm going to have a little frog that jumps around. He took a lot of the tropes, turned them on their heads, and gave us something completely new. Now, I think that Joss Whedon did that with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That was great too. But again, we need more people to take these kinds of risks. And risks don't necessarily mean being woke. I think, you know, we've taken wokeness to a level where it's becoming ridiculous. It has to work in the context of the story and the characters, and you can make it good. But going back to Lucas, he knew and really wanted to see certain things on the screen, and he managed to push hard enough to do it. Even though he had a mental breakdown in Star Wars, he was so stressed he didn't want to direct Jedi. He gave Empire to Kershner, although I think he was relatively involved in that too. And you can make arguments about the fact that for the prequels, he didn't have enough people telling him no. You always need somebody with a conscience. He used to rely on his friends, especially when they saw the first edit of Star Wars, and when the big six were there, and they gave him critical feedback that shook him to the core. The only person that actually liked the first cut was Spielberg, who had envisioned a lot more in his head than the other filmmakers, who were a lot more based in reality and serious film. But still, Lucas pushed and he changed things, and he wanted to do cinema his way, and doing it his way changed the face of cinema forever. And I really don't think we give Lucas enough credit for that. I think it was a travesty he wasn't involved in the sequels, and that's why we got the rubbish that we got. I watched the sequels with my son. He loves parts of them. I just think they're just so lazy and so banal and so forgettable, and I can go into that in another video. So for all his faults, for all of the things that he did that apparently ruined people's childhood, Lucas gave us an entirely new style of cinema and really pushed the boundaries, pushed the envelope of what was actually capable. And every time he gave us something new, he wanted to make sure that it was something we'd never seen before. And I wanted to just make this video to give my thoughts on that, and why I have immense eternal gratitude for George Lucas and what he did for film, and my interest as well. So rant over, slightly different type of video. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree, disagree with what I said? Did I miss anything? Did George Lucas ruin your childhood? And I will do more videos on Star Wars content in the future, but until then, catch you next time.